Hey, bud. So we're now on chapter 26 of The Queen of Sorcery. And just to recap, chapter 25, in case you were probably wanting to interrupt me and ask me 20 questions, Garion's new power that he used was he can teleport people or things. So he teleported a guy out of the water that was being eaten by leeches and tried to save him. But it didn't work. It worked kind of because he got him out of the water, but then the guy didn't make it. So that was his new power, and Aunt Pole is furious at him for doing it because she revealed that when you use magic, especially strong magic, it sends out like a signal so other people can feel it that have magic powers like gremlins. So now it's almost like they were giving away where they were to all the gremlins in the area. So now chapter 26. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had rolled in again, and the thunder began to rumble off in the distance as the rain swept in to drown the steaming city once more. The afternoon thunderstorm seemed to come all at the same time, and they'd even grown used to it. They all moved below deck and sat sweltering as the rain roared down on the deck above them. Garion sat stiffly, his back planted against the rough-hewn oak rib of the ship, and watched Aunt Pole, his face set stubbornly and his eyes unforgiving. She ignored him and sat talking quietly with Sinedra. Captain Gregg came in through the narrow companionway door, his face and beard streaming water. "The Draslenian Droblick is here," he said. "He says he's got word for you." "Send him in," Beric said. Droblick squeezed his vast bulk through the narrow doorway. He was totally drenched from the rain and stood dripping on the floor. He wiped his face. "It's wet out there," he commented. "We noticed," Hedder said. "I've received a message," Droblick told Aunt Pole. "It's from Prince Keldar." "Finally," she said. "He and Belgareth are coming downriver," Droblick reported. "As closely as I can make out, they should be here in a few days, a week at most. The messenger has a fever, though. Man's dressing, and he's reliable. Not sure he's going to make it." "Do you think his condition's that serious?" Aunt Pole asked. Droblick shrugged. "Who can say? Half of these pestilent fevers in Isia don't even have names, and we can't really tell one from another. Sometimes people get very sick, and sometimes they're only sick for a few days. Sometimes they don't recover. About all we can do is make them comfortable and wait to see what happens." "I'll come at once," Aunt Pole said, rising. "Dernick, would you get my green bag from out of our packs? I'll need the herbs I have in it." "It's not always a good idea to expose oneself to those fevers, my lady," Droblick cautioned. "I won't be in any danger," she said. "I want to question your messenger closely, and the only way I'll be able to get answers from him is if I cure him." "Dernick and I will come along," Beric offered. She looked at him. "It doesn't hurt to be on the safe side," the big man said, belting on his sword. "If you wish." She put on her cloak and turned up the hood. "This may take most of the night," she told Gregg. "There are gremlins about, so have your sailors stay alert." "Shall we go, Droblick?" "At once, my lady," the man assented with a sly look at Gregg. Garion felt a certain relief after they had gone. The strain of maintaining his bad mood in Aunt Pole's presence had begun to wear on him. He found himself in a difficult position. The horror and self-loathing which had gnawed at him since he had unleashed the dreadful fire upon Shamdar and the Widow of the Dryads had grown until he could scarcely bear it. He looked forward to each night with dread, where his dreams were always the same. Over and over again he saw Shamdar. He called Aunt Pole a monster, but it was the monster within himself that he hated. The dreadful catalogue of what she had suffered over uncounted years for him, and the passion which she had spoken, evidence of the pain his words had cost her, twisted searingly in his mind. He was ashamed, so ashamed that he could not even bear to look into the faces of his friends. He sat alone in Vacadine, with Aunt Pole's words thundering over and over in his mind. The rain slackened on the deck above them as the storm passed. Swirling little eddies of raindrops ran across the muddy surface of the river in the fitful wind. The sky began to clear, and the sun sank into the roiling clouds, staining them in angry red. Garion went up on deck to rest alone with his troubled conscience. After a while he heard a light step behind him. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," Sinedra said acidly. "Leave me alone." "I don't think so. I think I'll want to tell you exactly how we all felt about your little speech this morning." "I don't want to hear about it." "That's too bad. I'm going to tell you anyways." "I won't listen." "Oh, yes, you will." She took him by the arm and turned him around. Her eyes were blazing and her tiny face filled with huge anger. "What you did was absolutely inexcusable," she said. "Your Aunt Pole raised you from a baby. She's been a mother to you." "My mother's dead." "The Lady Polgar is the only mother you ever knew. And what did he You give her for thanks? You called her a monster. You accused her of not caring. I'm not listening to you, Garion cried. Knowing that it was childish, even infantile, he put his hands over his ears. The Princess and Nedra always seemed to bring out the worst in him. Move your hands, she commanded in a ringing voice. You're going to hear me even if I have to scream. Garion, afraid that she meant it, took his hands away. She carried you when you were a baby, Sinedra went on, seeming to know exactly what the sore spot on Garion's wound conscious lay. She watched you your very first steps. She fed you. She watched over you. She held you when you were afraid or hurt. Does that sound like a monster? She watches you all the time. Did you know that? If you even so much as stumble, she almost reaches out to catch you. I've seen her cover you when you were asleep. Does that sound like someone who doesn't care? You're talking about something you don't understand, Garion told her. Please, just leave me alone. Please? She said mockingly. What a strange thing for you to remember your manners. I didn't hear you say please this morning. I didn't hear a single please. I didn't hear any thank yous either. Do you know what you are, Garion? You're a spoiled child. That's what you are. That did it. To have this pampered, willful little princess call him a spoiled child was more than Garion could bear. Infuriated, he began to shout at her. Most of what he said was wildly incoherent, but the shouting made him feel better. They started with accusations, but the argument soon degenerated into name-calling. Sinedra was screeching like a Kamar fishwife, and Garion's voice cracked and warbled between a manly baritone and a boyish tenor. They shook their fingers in each other's faces and shouted. Sinedra stamped her foot, and Garion waved his arms. All in all, it was a splendid little fight. Garion felt much better when it was over. Yelling insults at Sinedra was an innocent diversion compared to some of the deadly things he said to his Aunt Pole that morning, and it allowed him to vent his confusion and anger harmlessly. In the end, of course, Sinedra resorted to tears and fled, leaving him feeling more foolish than ashamed. He fumed a bit, muttering a few choice insults he hadn't had the opportunity to deliver, and then he sighed and leaned pensively on the rail to watch the night settle in on the dank city. Though he would not have cared to admit it, even to himself, he was grateful to the princess. Their descent into absurdity had cleared his head. Quite clearly now he saw that he owed Aunt Pole an apology. He lashed out at her of his own sense of deep-seated guilt, trying somehow to shift the blame to her. Quite obviously, there was no way to evade his own responsibility. Having accepted that, he seemed for some reason to feel better. It grew darker. The tropical night was heavy, and the smell of rotting vegetation and stagnant water rolled out of the trackless swamps. A vicious little insect crawled down into his tunic and began to bite him somewhere between his shoulders where he could not reach. There was absolutely no warning, no sound of lurch of the ship or any hint of danger. His arms were seized from behind, and a wet cloth was permed firmly over his mouth and nose. He tried to struggle, but the hands holding him were very strong. He tried to twist his head to get the face clear enough to shout for help. The cloth smelled strange, cloying, sickeningly sweet, thick somehow. He began to feel dizzy, and his struggles grew weaker. He made one last effort before the dizziness overcame him, and he sank down into unconsciousness. So that's the end of the chapter. So someone, right at the end of the chapter, grabbed Garion and put him to sleep. So he's now a captive.